groups, stems, etc. And we're going to be taking a look at the MUSIO template, at the template in an afternoon template as well, and where we would route each one of the individual tracks. So with that being said, let's get started. Vincent, anything that you want to ask before we start?
Yes. Just right before you start, I'm sorry for asking because this is rather a technical question, and if there's no time for it, just tell me. But I've got actually I bought the Sparrow MIDI maker.
Yeah.
Same as yours, except that I don't have any knobs on it, only faders, and I can't actually make it work on Cubase for some reason. I mean, it is recognized inside the software. I see it as a MIDI control surface. It is in the setup. It appears in the studio setup as active, but when I have programmed it through the MIDI Maker website editor tool. So this part is okay, but for some reason when I move the faders, that doesn't do anything on my VSTs. I mean, I can't control neither the modulation or volume or anything.
Don't worry, we're gonna have Q&A at the end, so I can, explain you. I can show you how I have it configured on my end.
Okay, thank you. That was
should be fine.
I didn't want to take your time. Sorry.
Don't worry. No, thanks for that. Way it helps me a little bit plan on how much time we need for the Q&A. But yeah, we'll tackle that. All right, and so we've got things pretty organized today. I'm gonna move you a little bit over here as well, and we're gonna be talking about groups. But first, let's talk. And by the way, we're talking about a template where you've got a series of tracks, and there is a point where you've got 10, 20, 100, maybe 200 tracks, and the template, if we remember, there's two things that the template is going to do. First, it's going to be everything loaded, so speed, right? Is everything loaded so we can just put your hands on the keyboard and start composing. But then the second thing is sound. The template should have a series of plugins that will mix or EQ, whatever, that mix our music as we are composing. The problem is that as you start having more and more tracks, right, and you start loading plugins, so obviously each track has an instrument that you load on a sampler, etc. But then and that also already loading your CPU. If on top of that you start adding plugins, well, there are some plugins that are very efficient, some tape emulation, some EQs are very efficient and are not going to tax your computer. But there are other plugins that are more taxing, like reverbs, for example, and it will be completely unreasonable to add a different reverb to each one of the instruments that you've got loaded. Obviously, this would tax, that will overload your CPU. And so what we have generally in the template for efficiency's sake, but also as well for organization's sake, is templates generally are going to be organized in, and I've done this several times, we're going to have hundreds of tracks here. This is where we've got all the sounds loaded. Then we're going to have a series of groups, and we're going to route groups of tracks to each one of these groups. Boom, this one. And then finally, we're going to have stems. So groups, and then stems. And we're going to have groups of groups that are going to be routed to the stems. Here's where the mix happens. Mix. This is important. Here's where the mix happens at the groups levels generally. It's a mixture in between the individual tracks. We're going to have some EQ and some saturation here. And then mix happens between the individual tracks and the groups, but mostly generally here at the groups level. Okay, so with that being said and explained, let's move on to the slides. So basic structure, very basic structure. We're going to have a series of stems. These guys here, the stems. For example, orchestra, synths, percussion, keys. This is an example. We're going to have a series of groups. this part here. And this is an example. This could be different. Strings high short, strings high long, strings low short, strings low low, low long, etc. Okay, we'll get more into which ones specifically and why in the the next slide. And then finally, we're going to have a series of effects tracks, because let's not forget, we're going to need to have reverb here. And again, you could have the reverb built in here, but when you end having this is a simplification. When you end having 30 groups, having 30 reverbs loaded, it is not efficient. So generally, we're going to have a series of these effects groups where we're going to load the reverbs, and then we're going to route them with sense to the groups or to the tracks. This is something for us to decide. We'll get into this in a second. Okay, so this is kind of like the basic structure, and this is just, we've talked about this in the past. This is just a summary to make sure that we are all in the same page. For more in-depth explanation about this, I would recommend, check out the free course here at Cinematic Composing. You just go here to free training, and we've got the template course where I go more in depth in what I'm talking about. Okay, but today we're going to go specifically more in depth into the groups. Okay, and again, the groups are these guys here. Edit my template. They look like this. If I bring the mixer over here, all these colored tracks, if you see yellow, blue, green, all these are just tracks with all the instruments loaded, and violins, trumpets, these are the actual sounds, okay? But as we get to the end of the template, these darker blue ones, which are not many, it's more like 32 for me, I think it is. These are the groups. And as you can see, string short high, string short low, the exact same thing that we were talking about earlier, string short high or strings high short, strings high low, strings low, etc. Okay, cool. Okay, now let's talk about groups. So finally we're arriving. Let's talk about groups. Which groups do we need to have? And then we'll talk about, before the groups, what track goes to what group. Okay, so an oboe staccato goes where? Well, to the woodwinds high short, if that's the group that we've got. We'll talk about this later, okay? But now let's talk about which groups should we have, okay? So let's keep this very simple. More groups means more mixing flexibility. Meaning, if you have more groups, more separation, because you can decide to have whatever amount of groups you've got. You could have strings, woods, brass, percussion, right? And those are 4 groups. That's it, and that's all you need. But why would you need 4 groups or 30 groups? What's better? Well, the more groups that you have, the more mixing flexibility. We'll talk about this in a second. But also, this adds more complexity. The bigger the system, the more complexity, and we want to avoid that. We want to go for the sweet spot between, balance and flexibility, which is what we will talk about next. But the more groups, again, more mixing flexibility, but also more complexity. The less groups, the more manageable. It's just simpler, and simple is good. My recommendation is keep it as small, as simple as possible, as long as it gives you enough mixing flexibility. Okay. And back in the day, before being Pro and powerful computers, for example, if let's just go back here for a second. Like, why would we need groups if we can do the mix directly into in the tracks? My reason is, I do the mix faster here than here, because dealing with hundreds of tracks is harder than dealing with 30 tracks. Just try, go ahead and export your MIDI tracks into audio tracks, import it in a Pro Tools session, and go mix a 200 track session. It takes time. It takes time. Loading all the tracks, cleaning all the tracks, doing a proper mix of a 200 tracks queue takes more time. So less is better, as long as it is not compromising mixing flexibility. Okay, so but still, it's like, okay, cool, but still, why so why don't we do the mix here? Like ultimately we're going to have way more flexibility here, right? Yes, but it's going to take more time for me. And also it's going to take more CPU power. And that's why you simplify it in a way that you can more manageable mix your music as you are composing in your composing template in a series of groups. And this was even more obvious back in the day, because these days it's fun. It's like everything loaded in, like as long as you've got a power, like we're getting there, as long as you have a powerful enough computer. In my case, I'm very lucky to have one of these Mac Studios. Is the first generation, the M1. I bought it used. It's still a very expensive computer, and I'm very fortunate to have one of these. So we are getting there. Computers these days are powerful enough that allow us to not just have everything set up inside a one single DAW, but also all the sounds actually loaded inside the sequencer. Like everything's loaded here. I'm still using the enable disable version of this, so it's all loaded but deactivated many times, but it's all here. Just 5 years ago, or still now, but just five, or still now with a bigger template, just 5 years ago, this was not that reasonable, and you would go instead with BN Ensemble Pro. It's like it would look exactly like this, but the sounds were, or part of the sounds were actually loaded in a separate host, maybe inside the same computer, or maybe in a second computer connected, and that was BE Pro. Still with BE Pro, so another computer, just imagine another host, another piece of software, and the sounds are there, and they have to return to your computer somehow. They could return into individual tracks, no problem, but it was simpler to return to a smaller group of tracks, in this case, the groups. Okay? Just to simplify returns and routing. But back in the day, before BN Ensemble Pro, which was very nice, and that's, BE Pro has been here for the past, I would say 20 years. It's been more like 15, 17 years, but before BN was Bidule. But before having a piece of software that could sit in your computer or a second computer and route audio through Ethernet, before that you would have a separate computer, right? And that computer would have a audio interface, and that audio interface, which costs money, right? And it's a digital audio interface generator that will send audio through usually MADI, and it's 16 tracks or 32 tracks or 64 tracks of very expensive audio interfaces or converters from end to end. And so that was a real limitation, right? So you would have the sounds loaded in your server computer and output its individual channels. And so you had to, maybe you had 500 tracks loaded in your server computer, and all the stuff that you sent back had to be simplified in a way. So that was the reason back in the day why you had groups. But before that, before having a server computer, you would use one of these, not a controller, but an actual sampler, piano sampler with, or keyboard sampler with sounds in it, and you would output those sounds through the maybe 8 stereos if you got lucky. So you see, there was always a hardware limitation. We don't inherit those physically, because now everything is in the box and we've got way more flexibility, right? Way more power. But still, when it comes to mixing, it's simpler to do it here. Okay. Hopefully this makes sense, gives a little bit of context of why simplifying the groups. But still, when setting up the groups, like this, for example, where I've got about 32 groups, there are still two approaches. Okay, I'll explain them, and I'll share with you which one is the one that I prefer the most. We've got, again, so more groups, more mixing flexibility, but more complexity, less groups, more manageable. So when setting up the groups, there's obviously always going to be less groups than actual tracks, but there are two approaches to groups. It can be the most detailed approach, which is here option number 1, which is not the one that I use, and it would work like this. You would have one group per type of instrument or instrument type. Okay, so you would have a group for violins 1, you would have a group for violins too. And you would say, but isn't this the same as having the actual instrument loaded? No, because maybe if you've got violins 1, you could have easily 7 different violins 1 tracks, like, because you can have different strings libraries, and you've got one violins 1 from, Cinematic Studio Strings, another one from Cine Strings, another one from Spitfire, one of the 7 string libraries that they've got, right? So you can have different libraries, different violins 1 patches loaded. You can have one violins 1 long notes, one violin 1's legatos. You've got another one for maybe different articulations, and you compact you all those uh, types of violin 1 that you've got loaded in your template into the violins 1 group. And so essentially, what you see in the groups section of your template when it comes to orchestral instruments is the actual list of typical orchestral instruments. That's for orchestral. Obviously, if you've got exotic instruments, you've got percussion, you've got synths, you've got more groups. But it's pretty much violins 1, violins 2, etc. Right? Viola, cello. You could have the flute group, the oboe group, etc., etc. And so if you export groups for mixing, but you would be sending the mixing engineer if that's what you decide, or if you are mixing, or if the template is mixing your music, then that would be the number of groups that you would have. Generally, here you'll end having about 1/6 of groups compared to number of tracks. So for example, if you've got 500 tracks, you will generally end having about 85 groups, something like this. And this is useful for massive templates, for really big templates, more than 400 tracks. And it's the type of template of the type of composer who wants to have it all in the template, right? Which, is that composer that has multiple libraries and has all the libraries loaded in the template, and just generally is using BE Pro, multiple computers, that type of really, really big template. Where it's more important for you to have it all available. Almost everything that you own is loaded there. And it's that kind of template. So it's bigger and it needs more management, but because it has so many tracks, the approach with groups needs to be a little bit more detailed. Generally, that's the approach when you have a massive template. Okay, so that's option number 1. Option number 2, it's going to be this one, most balanced, which goes like this. It will explain exactly, this is the one that I choose, and they'll explain exactly which groups I have in my template. And it's not more clever, but it has to be, you have to put a little bit more of thought behind what groups do you need exactly. So then later on you have enough flexibility when it comes to mixing, but you don't have excess. You don't have things that you don't need to have. Okay? And it goes a little bit more like this. It's more like groups of tracks. Like it could be something like strings, brass, woodwinds, right? Percussion, synths, basses, and drums. That's it, kind of thing, right? It could be something like this. The problem with that, just such a small list of groups, is that you will lose mixing flexibility. So it looks a little bit more like this. It looks like strings, so high strings, short articulations. For example, violins 1 spiccato, violas staccatos, things like this. Violins 2 pizzicatos. Okay. And by the way, then the arrow and the next thing is this group would go to this stem. Okay, when we at the beginning when we talked about there's stems, there's groups, right? There's the sounds, groups, stems. This arrow here tells you where this group, to what stem this group would go. So strings, high-pitched strings instruments like violins 1, 2, and violas. Short articulations like pizzicatos, Bartok pizzicatos, con leños, staccatos, piccatos, things like this. We'll get there in a second. Okay, then strings, high string like violins 1, 2, and violas, long notes like legatos, long notes, long harmonics, things like this. Maybe trills, tremolos, and measured tremolos. Strings, low, short notes, strings, low, like cellos and double basses, long notes. And kind of like the same approach for the rest of the sections. I'll explain exactly which ones I've got. let's talk just for a second. Why is it that instead of just having strings as a group, why do we need, and to me this is a need, why would we need to separate high and low pitched and short and long articulations? And the explanation is very simple: reverbs. Later on, we will set up reverbs. That's for another class. But for now, for today, we're going to say that we're generally, when mixing, we're going to use different types of reverb and different reverb lengths for different type of instruments. And here's what I'll say: high-pitched instruments or high-pitched sounds will accept more reverb. Low-pitched instruments like low frequencies don't want a lot of reverb because reverb there creates muddiness. So if we've got separation, we can decide where to add more or less reverb. That's for one. And then on the other side, we've got short articulations like short notes like staccatos, and long articulations like sustains or legatos. Long notes will accept more and longer reverb, and short notes will accept less and shorter reverb. So an example clear would be violins 1, harmonics, high pitched, longs. You could add a ton of reverb and very long reverb, and it sounds great. But if you've got a cello ostinato, you may want to have no reverb or a very short reverb, just a tiny bit of it. And that's why I like to have this separation. Okay, so, and this is an example. Here, you'll usually end having about a tenth of groups compared to tracks. So for example, if you've got 300 tracks, you will end having about 30 groups. This is useful for small to big templates under 400 tracks. And the other one for bigger, massive templates. Most of the times with this, you'll have more than enough. But this one requires a little bit of more of thought behind what exact groups. And so I'm going to share with you, and this is the end of the first part of the class before the Q&A. What groups do I have? And I'm going to talk about a little bit which instruments would go in here, and also why I chose these particular groups. Okay, so first of all, I've got ensemble short notes and ensemble long notes. So what type of instruments would go into this group? Well, the typical, let's see if we go here. Yeah. This is a patch, and if we go to the MUSIO template here, MUSIO orchestral long notes, there we go. So this is what is brass, strings, and woodwinds, right? And so this is an ensemble type of sound, this orchestral type of sound that I cannot separate into different groups. So I've got two groups dedicated to ensemble type of sound. But I still, because I can separate short notes and long notes, I have two groups for this. So ensemble short and ensemble long notes. The one that I just played right now would be routed to the ensemble long notes. And I have the same thing for percussion because I have some patches. And by the way, this would be routed to the copy. Come on, copy. Paste. This would be routed to the percussion stem. These are my stems, by the way. Let's start with the stems. These are my stems. I've got an orchestra stem, percussion, synths, pulses, bass and subs, so sub bombs, but also electric basses and things like this, keys, pianos, celestas, and other stuff. So a total of 7 stems. These are these guys here. Tracks, groups, stems. The stems is what I export at the end of a queue to send my files for DAP mix. DAP mix is not mixing, is the file that we send at the end of a movie to the DAP mixing engineer, who's the person who's going to mix your music, which already mixed, with dialogue and sound effects. It's the final mix of the movie. It mixes your soundtrack with dialogue and sound effects. And so I don't send an stereo or a 5.1 file to them. I send that plus the stems. Because if they are mixing later on and need to turn down one stem, they can do that instead of turning down my entire cue. Okay, they've got more flexibility. But anyway, today's class is not about the stems, it's about groups. So, ensemble short, ensemble long, and percussion, ensemble percussion. We just talked about this. Then, remember that we talked about this looked very clean, right? Strings high and the strings low. Within the high, we've got the short notes and the long notes, and within the low, we've got the short notes and the long notes. Looks very clean, right? Still, this to me doesn't give me the exact or enough mixing flexibility for me. So the strings groups to me look like this, actually. String short high. Cool. Makes sense. Again, violins 1, 2, and violas. Short notes. Spiccatos, pizzicatos, marcatos, maybe, etc. Okay, cool. Strings short, low. Okay. Sorry. Yes, that's correct. A string short low. And here you would think cellos and double basses. It's actually just cellos, generally. But it's the same concept as, because I like to separate the double bass. That's essentially it. The double bass to me, as well as the tuba, and those are the only two. Those are the only two real low instruments in the orchestra. If you are composing a purely orchestral cue with no sweeteners, let's call it this way, if it's orchestral, the two low instruments are double basses and tubas. Not bass trombones, not timbassos, not bassoons, nada. It's double basses and tubas. Those are the two real low instruments. And in a cinematic context, generally it's going to be the double basses section. So for a cinematic sound, when you start sweetening things a little bit, meaning you start enhancing that orchestral sound, adding a little bit of more bottom end to the double basses, brightening the high, instrument, things like this, right? Having control over the double basses to me it's mandatory, it's very important. And so I don't like to group the double basses into the low strings. I like to have them separated because maybe later on, if necessary, I may do some treatment. Like maybe clean up that sound a little bit, enhance the low frequencies, maybe. In other cases, I may enhance the sound with a sub bass or with a sub synth or with like a sine wave, like things like this, right? But if it's purely orchestral, I like to have, for mixing purposes, I like to have the double basses separated. That's a choice that I made after, a series of mixes where I had the lowest strings and I couldn't have the double basses separated. I went into my template, I made a change. It's like double basses go to the double basses stem group. Sorry. So for strings, I'll have string short high, strings short low. I'll have the strings long high. I like to have the cine strings long high. This is me, because cine strings sound, I'm not gonna get too much into it, but the vintage M50s with the, that vintage capsule that brightens the sound a little bit in the Decca tree. I'm talking Decca tree and outringers or whites. So a little bit brighter than other libraries, more, ready to go, more cinematic sound, which is great, but also gives you less flexibility because it's already bright. But if I treat this stem mixing wise the same way that I treat other long high strings stems, then it ends being too bright. I add a little bit of tube saturation for brightness to the strings to add brightness, but not to the cine strings. So all the cine strings, high pitch instruments like violins 1, 2, and viola get routed to this particular group. Then I've got the double basses separated, and then I've got one string stem for strings runs. I like to have that separated because sometimes I may want to add more reverb or I may want to automate reverb for this particular stem, right? I may want to automate reverb towards the end of a run and then bring it down just to have the reverb tail kind of thing, and then it goes down. So I like to have a little bit of separation here for string runs. Cool. So that's for strings. Then we've got brass short and brass long. That's it. To me, generally for brass, I don't need as much separation. I just need brass short, brass long. But I like to have my legato horns and my trumpets separated in a different track. So as you see, this is for me, for my composing style, for the type of music that I generally write, and for the mixing flexibility that I need when I'm mixing. This is what I did. Does it make sense for everyone? It may, but you may want things different. I'm just explaining how I have it configured and why. So in this case, most of brass instruments are going to go to brass short. And hey, by the way, horns here doesn't mean that all horns go here. To me, it's just the like epic legato type of big, robust 12 horns type of sound. And trumpets is the same thing. It's like the 4 trumpets melodic legato patches go there. That's for me. Everything else gets distributed between brass short notes and brass long. So brass short articulations, brass long articulations. That's me. Below the brass groups, I've got Brahms. And these generally would go more into like the synths and effects area. But I like to have Brahms. Let me see. Brahms. There you go. This guy here. In the... Yep. So I like to have it below the brass groups just because many times it goes with brass. And so then when it gets exported, that group is going to get exported below brass. And sometimes we've got low brass, monster long. We're going to have something like this, right? Which is still non-realistic brass, but it's like a low brass section. And on top of and below that, having a Brahms sound, you've got this big brassy sound. They go together. So I like to have them close. For woodwinds, I love woodwinds. I truly do. But I for the type of music that I usually hire to write, it has more of a, or either a soloistic and then gets routed to an auxiliary group. It's either more soloistic or more coloristic. It's there to support, to add color, right? So it's either effects, color, or solos, but generally doesn't have as much presence as brass and strings and percussion. So I have less groups because generally I don't need as much separation, because even though I could want to have as much separation, because the effect on the mix is lower, because generally it's more of a supportive role, I do not need to spend as much time with perfecting that part, and hence efficiency goes first in this case. So hence there's no need for as much separation here. The end of the day is how efficient, quickly can we get this done with the highest result possible. But but with that we have to eliminate some options and go for the 80-20 approach, and there are certain things that are going to be marginal. And so in this case, for woodwinds, just woodwind short and woodwinds long. Then I've got piano group that goes to the keys, stem, choir, for choir instruments that go to org. And here we would have choir short notes, choir long notes. In my case, for most cases, just with a choir group, I've got enough. Again, for us, this changes. For like if there's a specific movie or a specific cue that needs something where there's a lot of choir work that needs more separation, then I'll have more separation for the choir because it's the main element that's featured, and then we need to work a little bit harder on it and so need more separation. Great. Then I've got 3 auxiliaries. They're just the stuff that's there, groups that are there that will change the name depending on what I need. So in parentheses I put what's going there. So sometimes I'll have all these groups, but I need 3 instruments to be separated. I want them here because later on I can just take care of that. For in this case, for example, for the last cue, and I just copied and pasted this from my sequence from Cubase. In the last cue, I had a sound that's a trailer piano. It's a piano with lots of built-in reverb. I had the celesta and an acoustic guitar that I needed separated there. I needed those instruments to be separated so I could hear, reverb, compress, whatever separately. Awesome. So I've got a few auxiliary groups. And then the ARP. Okay, that sometimes goes to the orchestra stem, some other times goes to the keys stem. It depends. But in this case, but again, these things change depending on the project. Generally, not in every cue, but it does change depending on the movie. That's why we do concept before starting. But how do you know what you're going to need as you start the movie? How do you know that you're not going to change things? Because before we start composing music for a soundtrack, we spend a lot of time with crafting the concept first and then working on the suite. And then when I write the first cue, I've already have so much of the sounds and themes, etc. approved. And at that point, I already have the template not reassembled, but adapted for that project. Okay, cool, awesome. So we've got all the melodic instruments here. Now let's go for the fun percussion and synths. So percussion, I've got quite a bit of separation for percussion. So I would say I like to have essentially percussion high, mid, and low. That's it. So high-pitched percussive instruments, mid-pitched percussive instruments, low-pitched percussive instruments, like grand casa or bass drum. Okay. But I like to have my cymbal roll separated. Like there's a no that my percussion, my cymbal rolls go in the same thing as my shaker. There's just no, like they are both high pitched, but this is just completely different things. My high pitched metallic cymbal and stuff type of rolls go there because it's different approach. It's no compression, maybe but different. There's more reverb, so it's different, right? Maybe it's a different width treatment, different saturation, so it goes there. It's completely separated. Also, all my top of the mix, which is higher than high, all of the top of the mix. So all the tiki-takas, all the rims, maybe a specific type of shakers, the top of the type of thing, it's going to go there. Okay? And then I've got high, mid, low, as we discussed, and then I've got sub-bumps. Sub-bumps are sub-bumps. Just very low stuff. Boomers, sub-bumps, low hits, things like this. And then, for the same reason that I've got my cymbal roll, I also have my timpani. Timpani goes alone. At least for the type of music that I compose, it's my timpani. Don't touch it. Leave it alone. I want the timpani alone. So timpani has its own group. So I like it there. Timpani to me is the orchestral instrument that defines the kind of like the orchestral sound. If you want a traditional orchestral sound. And so I want a lot of control on the timpani. And sometimes I want it very centered and wide. So I need specific, just being isolated so I can treat it however I want. The same way that I had a few auxiliary tracks, I've got an auxiliary percussion here for whatever things. If I want to separate one specific instrument from any of these groups, boom, I'll put it here. And then continuing on percussion instruments, but now all of these are kind of like acoustic percussive instruments, whether they are orchestral or epic, whether it's a timpani or a taiko, it's all acoustic. Down below, it's going to be the kind of like processed trailer, kind of like bigger than life type of percussive instruments. And these are the typical trailer percussive groups that we're going to have. So punches and kicks. What does it go there? Punches and kicks, right? So let's see if I can. Punches Benches. It's gonna be loud. Ooh. So sorry. So punches, things like this. Punches, kicks, hits. The same thing. Hits is going to be hits. Hits distorted. There are different types of hits, but okay. The other one was loud. I couldn't control with for it's broken. But yeah. So things like this. So imagine how this adds, like imagine that you've got a percussive bed and you add this at the beginning of the it's downbeat. Like, right? So this is going to just enhance hits distorted muscle. There you go. It just adds that. Cool. So the downers do type of thing, right? And because I've got different types, different libraries, they are all get routed to this group. Effects, high, effects, low, just effects. This could be either orchestral or synths, textures, orchestral textures, things like this, right? It's going to go here, but it also can be synth effects. So it would go routed to either or, and or so to one or the other. Stingers, reversed sounds, whooshes. Let's see. There you go. There you go. So things like this are going to, or reversed and things like this are going to go here. Razors and shatters. And again, I'm just showing those because these are razors and shatters. Things. Oh, it's broken. There you go. Just find it. There you go. So these are just noise kind of thing. And I think I have one for, but I think in here I'll fit as well. Let me just open, load. Where do I route this one? No, this one goes to effects generally. These are just things like this. It's going to go, but there. This sounds weird and this is noisy and this has no use, but it truly can add to the overall mix. Then I've got a drums group for drum sets. And then here's a very important one, an electric bass or synth bass for electric basses that need to be separated from any other instrument in the orchestra. And then we've got synth short, synth long, synth. So synth short and synth long for synthetic short. It's the same thing as orchestral, synth long. Synth subs, if I've got a sub synth, is going to go there. And then I've got loops high and loops low. These are percussive loops like percussion beds and things like this. So I've got these two, and these get routed to the percussion stem. And then finally, we've got all the pulses. Pulses high, pulses mid, and pulses low for all the hold one key forever type of sound. So this kind of thing gets routed here. So pulsing the high, mid, and low. As you see, I've got all these top of the mix, mid, low, 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 tonal, high, mid, low. So I've got them separated and gets routed to each one of those groups. So that's it. So now that's it. Let's just real quick in the chat. Let's just try for fun where each one of these instruments that I'm going to name where it would go, okay? And just put it in the chat. I'm gonna say something like, I'm gonna go in the MUSIO template, and then we'll open for Q&A, and then we're gonna go. Q&A, because it took me a little bit longer. But for example, if we go to the MUSIO template, which is up here, right? And I say orchestral short notes, something like this, which has strings, brass, and woodwinds. It is an ensemble. Where would this be? Where would this track, to what group would it be routed? A steel hand drum, exactly. Ensemble short, exactly. Good one. So let's go for another one. Let's go for another one that maybe snare. Where would you put the snare? It's obviously somewhere here. Percussion short is a good answer. Percussion high, exactly. All percussive instruments. That's a good point. I assume for the big majority of my percussive instruments to be short, but obviously there are long percussive instruments like cymbal rolls or cymbal effects, timpani rolls, things like this, that you could, if you wanted, take a different approach and have percussive short notes and percussive long notes for each one of the high, mid, low. So that could be an approach but to me, what I found is that generally percussive, no matter if it's a long instrument, unless it's a very effective, like, cymbal effects like both cymbals and things like this that could accept more reverb. Generally, still for timpani rolls, drum rolls, things like this, or bass drum rolls, still, it's not like because it's a long note we can add more reverb. Generally, we're still going to keep the type of, relatively dry for percussion. Cool, awesome. So that's that. Let's go for questions. I'm going to real quick answer the Vincent one, and I'm going to show my config for this guy. And what I'm going to say is studio setup. I have it here, MIDI. Where is it? No.
I think it's
there you
MIDI
go.
remote. Yeah, that's it.
There you go.
And I have it too inside here, in there.
I have it set up this way.
It quite puzzles me because I can't understand why it won't work.
And you have set up all the MIDI faders, right, on their website?
Yeah.
Okay.
Affirmative. Yeah.
To me, and you see it here, but it's not responding, right?
Well, there's somewhere in Cubase, I found the place by accident, but I can't remember it right now. When you get actually control and check that your connection is up and running, and when you move the faders, it registers every channel and every degree of I don't know how to explain it, how to put it, but it says from 0 to 127. So it goes. The more you push the fader, the more it creates lines which says okay, connection on channel 1 and for instance volume 1, volume 2, volume 3, and all the way down to 127.
Make sure, and just to double check with you, each one of the MIDI tracks, and especially because you've got an instrument track and then you've got your MIDI tracks, each one of the MIDI tracks that you've got set up, do you have the input for all MIDI inputs? So first all channels, and then all inputs, not just whatever it is, like my keyboard. If I had my keyboard here, even though it's well connected my Sparrow, it would not record MIDI data for this particular. Or if I had one specific channel, which is not one because this one's configured in one, it would record just channel 1 data. This could be also
all right. Yes, because I didn't check the channel. Maybe it's still set on all channel, and then I've got to put it on channel 1 for because I set it up on channel 1 in the MIDI Maker editor tool.
two things. I would, if you want to try channel one, try, but I would go first all channels. That's the first thing, but not just all channels,
Right.
also all MIDI inputs. So all
Okay.
MIDI stuff that you've got on your desk, gets read
Okay.
by that particular track, and you have to do this in every track.
Okay.
Cool. Give it a try and let me know next week.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks a
All
lot.
right. No, yeah, great one. Where is it? Here. Already. More. Jay, go ahead.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for your time as always. I just wanted to reach out and do a quick follow-up. Last week we were discussing really briefly. They have some issues with MUSIO on Cubase. You asked me to reach out to tech support and see if I get a response. And Chris Hazel over there was very diligent and kind over the past few days. Says he took my template. He says he's gonna reach out to you and your team over at Cinematic Composing and see if he could get a template from them and see if the development team solution or if it's someone else.
Let me. 1 second. Jay, can you unmute yourself one more time, please?
Yes, absolutely. I'm sorry. Were you able to hear any of
Yeah,
what I just
absolutely.
said?
You reach out to them, and they'll reach out to us. That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So he
What?
said, I guess he's gonna reach out. They're gonna reach out to you guys for a template from you guys. So I guess to see if they can duplicate. If there's a conflict between my template and yours. I don't know if they have or not, but just a heads up.
Awesome, fantastic. Who did you speak with?
Chris Hazel is who I've
Chris.
been
All right.
emailing with back and forth. And just honestly, if we can get this resolved, I'd love to just buy their software because if they're that diligent with their tech support, it says a lot to me about their brand and how they stand behind their product because he's really been just in touch.
Awesome, fantastic. Yeah, they're a great company, great people. We love them. Okay, thank you so much. Thanks for the heads up. Be looking on the inbox for the to get a message
Absolutely.
from
Thank
them.
you.
All right, Jay. Thanks. Vincent, anything else?
Yeah, sorry, I forgot about it to answer that's completely different question. I wanted to just to ask you if is there any means to send a message to Nathaniel or Dirk between the classes? Because I don't know how, and that was just to remind him that he uploaded his last class, but not the Q&A session from Tuesday.
I would
And I
say
was interested in.
I would say so. There are two ways. Either in the momentum group you can tag them and they'll receive an email, or you can send an email to Esteban and that's the Nathan's email, and that way you can reach
Okay.
them directly.
Okay, and if I tag him in the general discussion, it works.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I mean, they receive the notification. Okay.
Yeah, as long as you tag them, they receive an email.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Already. Hey, I gotta go now to get an interview to one of the winners of the last contest. It is starting in 2 minutes. So I'll see you next week. If you've got any other question, feel free to send me an email at mark@cinematiccomposing.com, or I'll see you in the next class and we can talk then. Other than that, thanks again. I hope this was useful, or at least entertaining. Have a great rest of the week, and I'll see you next one. Have a great weekend. Talk soon. Bye bye. See ya.
Thank you, Mark. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.